All right. I'm Les Schaefer, um, and I'm speaking to you this morning. I know it's late at night where folks in India are, and I admire your stamina and being able to stay with it so many hours. But I'm speaking from Richmond, Virginia, where it's a chilly, wet, kind of yucky day after a few really nice days in the 60s. Now it's just above freezing. Um, But that's February, the dismal month that goes on for 63 days. I've been storytelling, I guess, for a long time. Um, Somebody once said, I heard, a good story will get you out of just about anything. And because I was a kind of a kid who was always getting into everything, I had to learn a lot of good stories to get out. I also was raised partly by my paternal grandmother, one of her methods of supervising me and disciplining me and all, if I did something, she told me a story. And her stories were often about her immigrant experience, coming here from maybe Russia. She wasn't even sure. She said it would change all the time what country they were from, depending who won the last war. Or her stories were old Jewish stories or stories out of her own living on a in a tiny no-name shtetl out on the steppes of Russia or whatever it was. So I heard lots of stories growing up. I was also, and I want to say that I was also fortunate enough. I'm probably in the last generation of kids who grew up on radio, not television. And for some of you folks, radio was like television without pictures. And it depended all on your imagination. Everything was spoken or done through music or silence or whatever, and our imaginations filled it in, listening to stories, adventure stories, what they now call situation comedies, all the shows, new shows and all. It was all this dialogue between my imagination and the voice coming out of that beautiful wooden box, all lit up in the back with tubes and electric stuff and voices coming out. When I was 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old, I used to think the performers were in the back of the cabinet of the radio, but that's what I grew up with. Today, I'm going to do a workshop on dilemma tales, mostly from Africa, but we'll also talk about dilemma tales from India. Dilemma tales are these stories that present a situation, and instead of leading you to the conclusion they lived happily ever after, dilemma tales leave you at the height of the action, usually, where the protagonist is facing a crossroads. If you were on 90 minutes ago when I did when Eric asked me to say something about my workshop coming up, I told a little story about myself being a young man and on my way to an important job interview, and crossing the street, somebody gets hit in front of me by a truck, a pickup truck. And my dilemma, what do I do? Do I stop and help, or do I go on to this really, for me and my family, super important interview? I really needed that job. I had two babies at home. My wife couldn't work. I was the sole support. I had to have that job. And there's this man bleeding at my feet. What do I do? What's the dilemma? Um, and I ended the story there. And that's how the dilemma tales work. The dilemma tales originally, I think, came out, as far as I know, came out of Africa, and they're found in African literature throughout the continent. There are dilemma tales coming out of India, coming out of most cultures will have something similar. Um, I don't know what you think I should have. What should I have done standing there on the street facing this, help this person or help my family, make sure my family, I'm taking care of my family by trying to get this job. What should I have done? Anybody have any opinion? I can't see you all from my screen, so you'll just have to speak up. Yeah,
Well,
I need.
yeah, maybe I would have tried to find the in-between solution where if there is a possibility to call up the interview guys or the office that I'm attending the interview for, to just inform them of a humane situation that I'm confronted with, where life is more important and the job is important for me, for my life, but then there is somebody at the stake of life and death. And I mean, if that morality is not enough for the company that I'm going to get a job at, I think that job is not worth it. So for me, in my perspective, human life is more important. So, but also the commitment that I've made to come and attend the interview. So maybe I could do a quick call and attend to the emergency at hand and hope
Yeah.
that, yeah, humanity will be taken care of in providing
Mhm.
me where I have to land. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, uh,
One little excuse me, Pratigaya, am I saying it right?
yes, you are.
Anis, one
Yeah.
little problem. This
Mhm.
was in 1966 or something like that.
Mhm.
Cell phones weren't even a dream yet. They were a dream in the comic books.
Mhm.
In science fiction stories, we didn't carry our communication with us. And
Mhm.
here I am in the middle of a busy street, and there's no way to call. I mean,
Then
that's,
I know that I'm not going to die if I don't get this job now. But I can
yeah,
also apply for another job. I attend to the human situation there first, but I also probably get back and I don't know, write a letter if it was the time of letters,
yeah,
and tell the reason behind. And sometimes you don't know, it might surprise. I mean, they might have had another person in place of me, but then when they see that, okay, this is the kind of person probably we also need for our to represent our
yeah,
company, they might
yeah,
open something else that that was better than the first position. So I believe in these kind of things, that if some opportunity goes out of hand, something better comes by. But also you need to make sure you get back and keep the other party informed. So I would do
yeah,
that eventually, but I would, yeah.
yeah. Pretty guy.
Huh?
Yes,
Right.
now that we are just sitting here and thinking logically, it's easier to come up with answers. But I understand it must have been a real dilemma for you at that time. But I think, as Anise said, I would have tried to find a midway. It's saying it's on a busy street. I would just make sure there's somebody else who will take care of that person before I move on to the interview. I know I'll be late for the interview, and as we all know, we will go there and say this is the situation. This is why I was delayed. But I'm sure there would have been a way around that because you can't let a man to die either, right? That or bleed or get injured and just leave and go. That's not easy. That's not right.
Yeah, yeah. It isn't easy. Well, things are never easy. Louise wrote on chat to help the engine man and then explained to the interviewer why I was late. Thank you, Louise. That's what I did. Um, I stopped, tried to staunch the man's bleeding. I got blood all over me. Being in a city, even though it wasn't a crowded street at that point, people would do the city. I just walk around. And I finally got somebody else to run back to a store and call for an ambulance. And I stayed there till the ambulance came, was late to the interview, all bloody, in shock. And they'd already hired somebody else by that time. I was probably an hour late and they thought I wasn't coming. And I did the only ethical, sensible thing to do. I begged them that I could do this job. I would do it well, and I will do it for $1,000 a year cheaper than the person you just hired. And because these people were pirates, um, and their own kind of retail mafia, they hired me, and I ended up spending 8 or 9 or 10 years there. So that we're faced with dilemmas all the time. Um, Eric, can we put up the slides?
Yes.
Yeah, let me move on. Okay. Do I switch the slides or do you?
No, just tell me and I'll go to the next one.
Okay, okay. Um, I first I first became aware of I first became aware of dilemma tales at a workshop of some sort of a workshop up in Washington D.C. in the huge, beautiful Washington Cathedral. It was in maybe 1990, and it was a all men's workshop. And somebody named Michael Mead, who's still writing and working, Michael Mead told a story, an African story, The Lizard in the Fire. And it just blew me away. At the time, I was working as a therapist, and I was running one program for violent men who were abusing women, and another program for adolescents that were showing violent tendencies and abusing drugs. And I basically didn't know what I was doing, and nothing was really working, particularly with the violent men. And hearing this idea of telling a story and letting the group struggle with what's the ethical right thing to do and giving opportunity for everybody to have a voice just hit me right between the eyes, both for my own life and for the lives of my clients. And then I was hooked on Dilemma Tales from that point on. Let me go ahead and tell you maybe a truncated version of this African story, The Lizard in the Fire. Uh, it's a story that comes from Central Africa, in Gabon, I think you pronounce the country. And the story originally, as far as I know, comes from the Lope, Lope dash Okanda people who live mostly in central Gabon and apparently have been there for a long time. There's archaeological evidence in that region of human occupation dating back 400,000 years ago. That's a long time. That's a lot of human activity. And I think this area was one of those areas of Africa that fed humans to the rest of Africa, that fed humans possibly to the rest of the world. But here's the Lizard in the Fire story. And there's a version in Michael Mead's book, Men and the Water of Life, but I think you can find it maybe in Abraham's Pantheon book on African folklore. I think may have a copy. Lizard in the Fire. A father told his son, if you ever sleep with a maiden, you will die. If you ever even sit on the mat with a maiden, just lie with her, you will die. And the boy grew up hearing this day after day after day. And maybe some of us heard similar stories from our parents. The father grew so anxious about this that when the boy was on the cusp of adolescence, becoming this thing between adult and child, he hid his son in the bush, let the boy grow up in the forest, every other day or so, he and the boy's mother would bring food to the boy, see he was okay. And the father would always say to his son, if you ever lie with a maiden, you will die. Well, one day, miracle of miracles to this lonely adolescent out alone in the forest. One day, a most beautiful young maiden came down the path toward the clearing where he lived. She saw the boy. The boy saw her. The maiden said, you live here so alone. I'll come and visit you each day. And they had a wonderful visit that day. And as she was getting ready to leave, the boy says to her, my father told me I would die if I ever lie side by side with you. I would die as if a warrior's sword had plunged into my heart. The maiden, being a cool young woman, said, well, in that case, I'll not come again. It's not my wish that ye should die. And the young man is now faced with his dilemma. No, no, please come again. I beg of you. Please come anyway. One of the joys of adolescence is this living, this ability to live between life and death. Who knows? But he says that. And the maiden says, okay, then, I'll come back. And if you die, we'll see. Maybe we can bring you back to life again. Maybe. The next day, the maiden came. And the next day after that, she came again. Before very, very long, the youth and the maiden lay together. And what do you know? Once in a while, even a father is right. The boy died, just as he said, just as his father had said, dead, dead as a rock. Ah, what did the maiden do? She knew she had to do. She runs back to the boy's village, tells their parents, oh, your son has died. I'm sorry. Whatever. What did the father do? What did the mother do? What did parents do? They wept and they grieved and they tore at their clothes. What did the maiden do? She had a cool head. She ran back deep, deep in the forest to the old hunter of the bush, and she told the hunter the whole story. And this wise old hunter said, that's no problem. All you need is a lizard and a fire. The hunter went to get a lizard. The youth was brought to the village. Wood was gathered and piled high. The fire was lit. The people of the village all gathered around. When the flames were great, the hunter, the old hunter, told the villagers, put the lizard in the middle of the fire, and they did that. And the hunter said, now here's the situation we're in. And it's a situation. If the lizard dies, burns on the pyre, the young man will stay dead. But if somebody pulls the lizard from the fire, the boy will live. He'll return to life again. Okay. Of course, the father tried to wants his son back. The father tries to go into the fire. The flames are so hot, burning so fiercely, they push him back. His clothes are even burnt. The mother, also, what mother wouldn't do this? She tries to jump into the fire to get the lizard out before the lizard burns up. She too can't get there. It's too hot. Her clothes are starting to burn, and she pulls back. The maiden, as lithe as she is bright, the maiden, she jumps right into the center of the fire, pulls the lizard out. He's not even scorched, brings it back alive. And the young man, just as the hunter had said, the young man springs back to life. But the hunter's not done yet. He said, now here's the situation. the young man is back in life again. If he kills the lizard, his mother will die. But if he doesn't kill the lizard, the maiden will die. Kill the lizard, and the youth and the young woman will live, but the mother will die. Don't kill the lizard, and the mother and son will live on, but the maiden will die. The question is this, dear friends, all of you. The question is this: what would you do? What would you do? Okay. Any thoughts about that? Again, you're gonna have to speak up because I can't see everybody. What would you do?
In some way, I would want to snip off the lizard's tail or something so that the lizard could molt. It would seem like it died, but then
Uh-huh.
it would be resurrected in a new form with a new
Okay.
skin.
Yeah. We're not offered that choice, but we're being creative, Rachel. We're being very creative. Okay. What do other people think?
I think I would not. I would suggest he does not kill the lizard because one death is better than two.
Oh, okay. Pragmatic. Very pragmatic.
Because there is
But
no choice in a way. There
yeah,
is death involved. At least let the lizard live on.
yeah. But isn't that life so often? Isn't that like our choices so often? There is no, the choice is terrible either way, which is the least terrible. And we're called upon to do that over and over again, I think. Anybody else have suggestions? What they would do? Don't be shy. Come, come, come. My first thought when I heard this story, kill the father. He started this thing. If it wasn't for him, it wouldn't have happened. Our fathers sometimes make, and I as a father, sometimes say the dumbest things in defense of our, thinking we're protecting our children or our families. It was he started it. Let's kill him.
Yeah, I
Um,
second that. And we bring our fears to life, actually. Probably
yes,
didn't exist in the first place, and giving life to those fears sometimes and doing everything in your ability to prevent it also
yeah,
causes these things.
yeah.
True.
Well, in 1990, at the Washington Cathedral in Washington D.C., I'm in this huge space with 300 or 400 men, and they sit quietly during Michael's story. And when he said, "Bring, what would you do?" At first, there's silence, and then one brave guy speaks up, and somebody else speaks up. In about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, the place was in an uproar. Everybody had an opinion. Everybody was expressing it. The crowd in the cathedral starts breaking up into 2 or 3 or 4 camps, and the weapons are coming out, and they're going to be at war. And Michael sort of calms things down and keeps the discussion going. That group never reached a conclusion. I mean, there really isn't a good one. There isn't one. But nobody got hurt that afternoon. And we kept on talking. And somehow it bonded us together. Can I have the next slide, please, Eric?
Yes. Just one moment.
Okay. All right. So some things I want you to keep in your heads when we go through this. want to look at some of the secrets of this genre of story and think about what happens with these, you know, these moral dilemmas, and they have to have a captivating narrative. It's got to be a good story to present this. And then we'll continue talking for the next hour or so, stories, lecture, I hope discussion, and some interactive activities that you get a better understanding of the underpinnings of these stories. Next slide, please. Thank you, Michael. And you can read that on the screen. These stories, you can bring in themes, morality, justice, resilience, the human condition, and it's a good way of bringing in these themes. Even the simplest dilemmas sometimes, often, are complex at their base. It sounds simple, but they're complex at their base. Even, walk into a shop. Do I buy this brand or that brand? It has implications for you. It has implications for the companies making the brands. It may have implications for the shop owner. You just never know. Hopefully, I hope you can begin to see that there are really profound lessons that possibly applicable to our crazy world. Um, and it gives us a place, and I think I heard somebody say about this maybe earlier in one of the other things I was listening to. It'll take you on a voyage where we're joining ancient wisdom with modern interpretation. And it becomes, I think, a demonstration of the power of the overall power of storytelling. All right. What are your expectations for being here? What should I be aiming toward? Anybody want to let me know what their expectations are very quickly? Oops. Well, in the world of you can't think of everything, my hearing aids are dying. Okay, now you're gonna have to speak up.
Okay. To be honest, I came with no expectations whatsoever. I have no clue where or what I'm going to be learning from here. But I remember listening to the story from you, I think last year. And that was my first exposure to a dilemma story. It sounded something different, it's sounding something new. So I'm here to explore more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be kind of for me too. I think same sort of expectations. Bring up the next slide, please, Eric. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if you can read the cartoon, but there's the little engine that could approaching a crossroad, a sort of a junction in the tracks. It can go one way or the other, one direction. It's uh, possible it could hit a group of workmen. In the other direction, it'll only hit one workman. And the little engine faces a tough moral dilemma. Sometimes our choices in life are, you're going to do this kind of damage or you're going to do that kind of damage. I think when we talk about things like um, global climate change, sometimes economic issues between communities, there's going to be hurt one way or another, and the community involved has to figure out what's going to be the least damaging. Um, let's take another. I think we only got time for one of these. Um, you're at the beach. Your daughter, your wife, and your mother-in-law are caught in a strong current. You want to run in and save them, but you can only say they're separating, and you can only save one of them. Who would you choose? Why would you choose them? Why would you choose that person?
I would choose my daughter
Uh-huh.
if that's the only choice, because
Uh-huh.
my mother-in-law has had a life.
Mm-hmm.
My wife could be important, but she has also had a life just like I have had,
Mm-hmm.
and I think my daughter needs to live, and at least there's one parent to take care of her. So yeah, that would be because if both of us were in that situation, I wouldn't have saved my daughter. But because one parent could be alive and taking care of her, then I know that isn't enough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about other folks? Anybody else having a thought on it?
Same choice. Go for the daughter for the same reason that the daughter still has a life ahead. There's lots more to experience. It's still a budding life. It's still a growing life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would, yeah, I would hope to think most parents might make a similar decision. It's that strange thing that happens to some of us when you become, hopeful, most of us, when you become a parent, that here's a person you would give your life to this child. Here's a person you would gladly give your life to or give your life for. A little personal story. This is an important story for me. My mother died right after I was born, probably due to complications from the childbirth. And this was back in the 1930s. We don't have the miracle drugs, antibiotics, stuff like that. My immigrant family covers up that my mother, what happened, because that's what immigrant families often do. I grow up thinking I've killed my mother. And I live with that, and it's awful. And then I become a parent, and I realize that even if I'm the cause of my mother's death, she probably would have gone to that death gladly, choosing herself over me, because I would do the same thing for my children. Probably still would. Next slide, Eric, please. Okay. Oops. And I hope you can read that. It looks small on my screen. I'll go ahead and read. I don't like reading from slides, but I'll do it. A dilemma tale usually centers around a character or characters facing a moral or ethical dilemma. Okay. And it presents conflicting choices, conflicting courses of action, and each choice has consequences. If you're going to use dilemma tales as teaching tools, what you're also teaching is that choices have consequences. And that may be the single most important thing we have to teach young people. Choices have consequences. No matter what you choose, there's a consequence. Some consequences are wonderful, some are horrible, some you'll barely notice. Using these tales, again, if you're using them as a teaching thing with young people, you're looking at how complex decision making is, given human nature and the consequences of choices. Sometimes even simple choices can get very complex. And there's always a tension between differing values, desires, responsibilities. There's always this tension. The little story we just did about who you're going to save, um, there was a consequence to each choice. You had a different, the protagonist has a different responsibility toward the daughter, the wife, and the mother-in-law, and themselves. And there's a different responsibility in each one. And again, with these tales, it's going to prompt the reader or the listener or the student to kind of reflect on their own beliefs and values while being engaged in the characters' struggles to make these difficult decisions. The ideas behind these dilemmas, they have to have a narrative. It's a story. So the narrative is going to depict individuals grappling with complex choices under challenging circumstances. You're in most cases you're looking at a sort of a good work framework. I don't know how to put it any different. Dilemma is often aligned with this concept of good work, excellent ethical considerations, which may change time by time, community by community. The moral values that come up when you're facing a dilemma. In a sense, the dilemma tales are precursors of case studies that we use in professional schools and we use in research. We use even, in say high school teaching children. You're providing a sense of an authentic, an in-depth problem for reflection, for discussion, for sensible discussion, and you're helping the listener or the students develop insights applicable to their future lives, future careers. I think as storytellers, this is just personal, we're probably equally as much teachers as tellers. Being a storyteller, you're being a teacher. And even if we're doing performance, we still have this teaching responsibility because that's what stories do. Finally, with this, dilemma tales get us into this whole idea about ethical reasoning, which sometimes in today's world seems to be out the window. If you're living in the United States right now, we're dealing with this at a national level on so many different issues where people making decisions that affect multitudes of other people, and how do you join your political considerations with the ethical considerations? And unfortunately, a lot of the times, the ethical considerations kind of get tossed out. Next slide, please, Eric. It's important to know that the African oral tradition is so central to so many of the people living on that huge fractured continent, where in Africa, perhaps in India, in some ways, I guess in the States, storytelling is more in the form of communication. It's sacred. It's a sacred art form. And I think as storytellers, most of us know that, and we carry it in our hearts. And when you're telling it as a sacred thing. And I think you've probably heard that over and over again as you've listened to stories in this festival. In many communities, storytellers are really honored. Griots in Africa, praise singers, or elders who have the responsibility of preserving collective memory, training younger generations in places where that's still important. Storytelling is important. And it's not just dilemma tales. We do it through telling myths, legends, folk tales, oral histories. They're all kind of together, and we're weaving intricate webs of imagination. We're instilling moral lessons, ancestral wisdom into the hearts and minds of our listeners. Next slide, please. And I know in America, this oral tradition was carried to us in so many ways in the holds of the slave ships and in the minds and the hearts of the people who came in on those ships. I think if we had time, this might be a place to maybe say a few words about stepping foot into somebody else's traditions, and do we have a right to do that? Most of the elders and indigenous communities I've talked to have always said to me, it's important that the stories be told, but you have to tell them with respect, and you have to tell them with knowledge of the community they come from. In America, I think we're discovering, and this may be, I'm not sure about India. Our Constitution, the American Constitution, is in itself a dilemma tale, and that's coming to the forefront 250 years after the writing of the Constitution. This is now at the forefront of discussion. We have this clash of stated ideals in the Constitution versus the reality of the ground. On the ground, all men are created equal, yet in the Constitution, some men, and we mean women and children there also, some people were only worth 2/3 the value of another person. And in today's fractured society, we're certainly seeing that again. Next slide, please. This, storytelling fosters empathy and understanding and transcends all the boundaries. Looking at the screen of your names here, we have names from almost all over the world. And we're here, storytelling binds us together. And look how when we're talking about, especially when we talk about storytelling and different kinds of storytelling, different ways of storytelling, we as tellers and teachers of telling, we share a common language. We share the common threads of human experience. I don't know, do you, in your work, what are the dilemmas? Let me pose a few questions to you and choose one and answer. And I'd like to hear from some of the people we haven't heard from yet. What are the dilemmas that are built into your society, your community, your culture? And how do these dilemmas show up in your folk literature, for example? And every community has its dilemmas. What are you dealing with? What are the dilemmas of yours? And even if we're not answering out loud, I hope you're thinking about that.
Priyanka, go ahead.
Is that Fabio saying something?
Oh, no, it's me, Eric, saying Priyanka, go ahead.
Thanks, Eric. I feel the dilemma that is ingrained, one of the dilemmas that is ingrained except for the northeastern part of India and a few other places scattered. Most of India, after the girls getting married, they move to the groom's house. The bride moves to the groom's house, and the groom's family becomes the bride's family. The groom's surname becomes the bride's surname, and uh, things like that. Sometimes in the older days, they also used to change the first name of the bride. Permission was not even asked, and those names used to be matched with the groom's name. So, like Deepak, Deepa, uh, things like that. So, one of the dilemma is how much, because in olden days, the women didn't earn, and they had to depend on the groom's earning or the groom's family for livelihood. And nowadays also, even though things have changed a lot, but still a majority part of the society, the women are still dependent on men. uh, Even though things have changed, they are emotionally more dependent, even have economically much more come, they have come forward. So say the bride's family, the parents are sick, or the bride's family is in some kind of facing some kind of financial trouble, whether the bride can actually ask for financial help from the groom or the groom's family or not is a big question, because moment they ask, it's like the bride's, because bride is no more a property or of the bride's family, she belongs to the groom's family. So I have seen multiple such cases where the bride had to secretly sell her jewelry to support her family, or maybe secretly ask the supportive groom to give money without letting her in-laws know. And it's a dilemma that which side is she? She is always walking on that eggshells. Thank you.
Hmm. Thank you. And I think that's what I understand a critical issue in your country and many other places too. Yeah. Um,
Hi, Les.
yes,
Can I say
Fabio.
something? Uh, I'm sorry, I can't participate very actively because I am with my baby over there, so I speak not loud. So, but one big dilemma in the storytelling field right now is about the ownership of stories. And like in Brazil, um, many people tell indigenous tales, but some indigenous people or persons, uh, they are starting not to like. Uh, in the old days, it was very common for them to want everybody to spread the word of stories. Uh, but nowadays, there is this issue. I'm fortunate that wherever I go telling indigenous stories, I ask for permission, or I I'm granted permission. People like the way I tell, the way I respect indigenous people's stories, but not everyone is as luck. And sometimes I think, well, they have the right to protect their stories and their way of telling and this and that. But also, it's a dilemma because uh, it's the very principle of storytelling that stories are meant to be shared, right? So that's a dilemma in our field.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one we all have to struggle with. I don't know if you all are familiar, the U.S. National Storytelling Association, the National Storytelling Network has a thing. What do you, I don't even know what you call it, where it's a comment thing and a discussion thing online that goes on every day, all day, 365 days a year, da da da. Well, cultural appropriation has been a central theme for the last few weeks. And it seems to me sometimes it's getting harder and harder to find what's the middle ground. I can understand the argument of wanting to protect our stories, but also the world would be an even bleaker place than it is if
Oh, you
we
took a
didn't have
shower?
this tradition of shared stories throughout the world that travel around the world. I do some a lot of teaching and been teaching a lot of courses on fairy tales for adults. And one of the things that strikes me is every one of the major fairy tales, what we call fairy tales, are really fate stories. They travel around the world. There are thousands of versions of Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, and who owns it? And yet we have to be cognizant that unlike Western civilizations, religion, storytelling, life are not separate entities. There's no separation between storytelling and life, church and I mean they're all together, and we have to be so cognizant of that. Um, Louise, you just put up a note on chat. I know you did. I can't, if I, let me see if I can find it. I'll read it aloud if you don't mind. In Ottawa, our Storytelling Association recommends that non-Indigenous tellers not tell traditional stories by Indigenous people. Uh, I can understand, I can understand that. Can I tell you a story about this? Um, Again, it's personal. My wife and I love to go to this little city in the northwest corner of the state of Arkansas in the United States. It's in the heart of the Ozark Mountains and a beautiful place. We love to go there. About 10 years ago, we're in Eureka Springs. That's the name of the city for a brief vacation. And we go to a art gallery. Now, Eureka Springs, besides being a tourist destination and a beautiful place, was also is also an important location in the history of the Cherokee people, one of our largest indigenous tribes here in America. So we go to this art gallery, and in the parking lot is a man wearing he's dressed Cherokee. He's wearing a war shirt. He's got a military jacket over that that's also painted with all sorts of Native American Indian symbols. Has a beautiful kind of a stocking, hand-woven stocking cap on his head, and his face is painted kind of half white, half black, with red stars on his cheeks. I think they were stars. And he's talking to some children in the parking lot. I'm carrying a book. We had just stopped at a little Cherokee gift shop up the block, and I bought a book of Cherokee stories by, I think it's Kathy Smith Littlejohn, and her versions of Cherokee stories are wonderful. And to me, they carry the rhythm of the language and the rhythm of the traditions. They're wonderful stories. And they spoke to me, and I thought it'd be great stories to tell. I see this man, this warrior, in the parking lot of the art gallery, and I wait till the children he's finished with the children, and I walk up, say hello, we shake hands, and I have a question for you. And I pull out the book and I show him the book. I said, I really want to tell these stories, I feel a little uncomfortable telling them. And we kind of talked about it, and finally he hands me back the book and he says, I think you should tell them. I think they need to be told. They shouldn't die. They need to be spread. This is our culture, and we want it, it needs to be out in the world. He said, you need to learn more about us as you tell these stories. You need to know who we are, what we believe, da, 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 da. And we talk like this, and we shake. This time we embrace when we say goodbye. My wife and I go into the art gallery, come back out a little while later. He's gone. We go back home. I go back to my life. I start telling these Cherokee. I still tell some of them. I love these stories. A few years later, a couple of years later, we're back in Eureka Springs for another vacation, and I think I owe this man some sense of gratitude, more gratitude. I owe him a thank you, a big thank you. I want to find him and thank him again. And we don't see him on the streets. I start going around to the Cherokee gift shop up and down the highway, and I ask about him. I mean, surely you've seen this man with the painted face, wearing the war shirt. He's out there talking to people. Nobody at any of the gift shops has seen him or claims to have ever seen him. We go down the road to where our cabin is, where we stay, and about a half a mile below us is a Cherokee cultural state, a cultural center, Cherokee Cultural Center. And we go down there and I talk to some of the docents and one of the curators. And again, describe the man, his paint, his markings. Surely you've seen him. Nobody knows who I'm talking about. Every time I go back to Eureka Springs, Arkansas, I ask somebody about him. And so far as I know, nobody has ever seen him. I'm still telling those stories, though, right or wrong. They're beautiful stories.
You meant Sandy.
Pardon?
You meant Sandy. You meant Sandahay, Coyote, the trickster.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I actually had thought about that.
I think
I
you
went
meant the
something
coyote,
like
and the
that.
coyote gave you the permission.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I
I'm
still don't.
primarily
It's a good book,
I'm
though.
I'm primarily a traditional storyteller. I specialize in Celtic stories. I consider it a compliment to my culture when people want to repeat the stories. The
Yeah.
key is dignity and respect. As long as you treat everyone's story with dignity and respect, it is more important that the stories live than it is for them to be told strictly by a particular group of people.
And I think you have to respect if they say don't do it. I could tell you another story about that, but that's not what this this is about. That's trouble with being a storyteller. You have a story for everything. All right, can I get the next slide, Eric? Please.
Yeah, yes, coming right now. Just a moment.
All right, while Eric is doing that,
Could I jump in with an experience?
sure, Rachel. And then go ahead.
Okay, my parents were Holocaust survivors, and I grew up with a lot of pain around that, and how I learned about it, what it meant to me. At one point, it was my whole identity. And when I started to hear people say, everyone has their personal Holocaust, it shocked me, because to me, the Holocaust was a specific time and place and series of events that happened to those people at that time and no one else. And the way it is being turned around now, and used by different groups as also disturbs me. I joined a poetry group and I started writing poetry, but I didn't want to disclose that background. And someone said to me, "What gives you the right to write this type of poetry?" And luckily, the leader jumped in and said, "Well, it's her racial heritage, it's her background." So I did not have to disclose my personal history. But at the time, I thought to myself, if the poem stands on its own merit and speaks truth, do I have to explain who I am? So I just wanted to let you know it's not just the stories that we tell, but also how we refer to different events.
Yeah. Well, I didn't say it was going to be easy. Yeah.
And I feel like I'm putting myself on the line to even disclose this much
Sure.
about myself.
Yeah. And here, if you're in the States, if you're speaking from the States, it's getting more and more dangerous to speak out about this. I
Yes.
think in certain places, in a lot of places. Somebody asked about the Kathy Smith Littlejohn book. I'm going to put up what I think is the title on the chat. And I think I've got her name right. Okay. Okay. All right. Where now I've completely lost track of where I am because I'm not good at keeping track. All right. I want to look at some ways dilemma stories teach safe, ethical discourse. And in a way, the last comment we heard, it's getting unsafe to speak, at least in the States right now. It's getting, in some places, in a lot of places, it's getting unsafe to say, to speak about certain things. You have to be careful. And I suspect this is kind of a worldwide phenomenon right now. But we can use these stories to teach ways of safe, ethical discourse. Ethics. The dilemma stories present situations where there's no clear right or wrong answer. I think when you're speaking, when you're living in a community that's being bullied by extremists, they want clear they only, it may not be true, or it may be only partially true, but everything is this or that, black or white, and the world is a world of gray. And these stories, using these stories, teaches people to explore complexities that ethical decision making usually is not black and white. It's always some shade of gray. And I think if we do that and we approach conversation in that way, we're going to approach with humility and more recognition of the nuances and complexities of different of ethical issues. Critical thinking. Man, I know they talk about we have now, because of bird flu, a shortage of eggs in America, chicken eggs in America. There's an even bigger shortage that nobody's talking about, is the shortage of critical thinking, and not just in America. Uh, and using these stories, I think, encourages people to critically evaluate different perspectives and different consequences before you make a decision. Empathy, perspective taking. Dilemma stories often involve multiple characters, conflicting interests or viewpoints, empathizing with each character's perspective, you learn to consider the feelings and perspectives of others. This would foster, you would think, empathy and understanding. Consequences of actions. Dilemma stories, and I think I've said this before, they usually depict the consequences of the actions, or at least they asking you to think about the consequences. And they highlight the impact of ethical versus unethical decision making. And looking at, even in these little examples we've used, they have real world implications, words and actions. Number 5, role modeling ethical behavior. If I'm telling a dilemma story featuring characters who are trying to demonstrate ethical behavior in challenging situations, um, audiences are learning by my example, and hopefully might be inspired to emulate ethical conduct in their own discourse. Can I get the next slide, please, Eric? I'm watching the clock. We're running out of time. I'm running out of time. Da, da, da. Promoting dialogue. Dilemma stories can spark meaningful dialogue, meaningful discussions about ethics and morality. And it doesn't have to be a shouting match. It shouldn't be a shouting match. We're engaging in dialogue about choices made by characters in the story. And it's the audience is free. When I told the couple of stories I told you, you were free to explore different viewpoints, whatever viewpoints you wanted. And hopefully we have in this room this electronic room right now, we have um, an atmosphere where that can happen, where we can promote dialogue, encouraging reflection. Again, something else that in this TikTok crazy 100 and whatever word world we live in, reflection is hard to find in this world. And we often do stupid things like we vote down reflective politicians, public figures who speak reflectively. That's a sure way not to get reelected or get elected in the first place, I think. Um, but these stories will encourage the audiences to reflect their own values, their own beliefs. Consider how would you respond in the situation? And you've done that. How are you going to respond in the situations I presented in the stories that I gave you? When we present these dilemmas in a narrative format, they engage audiences emotionally and intellectually because that's what stories do. And that gives them their power for teaching safe, ethical discourse, for teaching critical thinking, etc. Any comment? Not, I'm going to move on. Next slide, Eric, please. Okay, let's do another. Here's another story. This is from an old book, still around though, by William Bascom, called African Dilemma Tales. It's an old book. It was published in 1975, which was 50 years ago. Boy, I was just in my 30s then. Uh, this story is from the Bura people who inhabit Borno State in northeastern Nigeria. And they have an interesting language there. Their language is an Afro-Asiatic language. And they probably, some archaeologists whoever studies these things, think that these people may have started in Yemen, and then crossed over to Africa through the Nile Valley. But there they are. Here's the story. There were, and this is a very common theme in African dilemma tales about the blind people. There were four blind people: a man, his mother, and his wife, and his mother-in-law. A man, his mother, his wife, his mother-in-law. On a journey, the man found 7 eyes. And they're all blind. It doesn't even say, the story doesn't tell us how he found the eyes. He found the eyes. 7 of them. He gives 1 eye to his mother, 1 to his wife's mother. He had 1 eye left in his hand. Da, 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 da. Now, gives himself an eye. He gives them out, and he has 1 eye left. Something happens. Here's his mother looking at him with her new 1 eye. There's his wife's mother looking at him with her new 1 eye. To whom would you give the 1 eye he has left? If this thing would come to you, what would you choose? Which would you choose? Your mother or your wife's mother? Your mother or your wife's mother? Choose. And the storyteller would say to you, this is a real problem. Dare anyone to choose? I want you to choose. What would you choose? Can I get the next slide up, please, Eric? While people are thinking it over. Thank you. Somebody just unmute and speak out. Well, I'm not going to take away from your grade. It's either early in the morning or late at night for many of you. Either way, it's been a long day so far. But speak out if you want. What would you choose? Now consider this. If the man gives it to his mother, it will shame him in front of his wife's mother and with his wife, because both of them are going to be looking at him. If he gives it to his wife's mother, he's got to fear what his mother might do. What's going to happen to his mother's heart? Because your mother is not somebody you want to play with. That's difficult. What should he do? He has the sweetness of his wife, the sweetness of his mother, the sweetness of his mother-in-law. What would be the easiest? This is a real problem. We often have to decide who gets that last eye in many different ways. Give me the next slide, Eric, please. I'm going to move on. I hope you can read that. Nothing much. I'm not going to go say much about that. Next slide, please. I think this is important. Creating a safe, how do we create a safe environment for a peaceful discourse? And if we're storytellers and educators, and most often we're both, no matter what we're doing, and what can we do to create the safe environment? Being respectful of others, always. And we've all been at events where the person up there at the microphone has not been respectful of others, cutting people off, um, you know, making sarcastic remarks, et cetera, et cetera. Um, it happens, I think, way too often. Encouraging everyone to speak. And I hope I've done that today. It doesn't matter whether you speak out or not in this workshop. I'd love for you to. The more important thing is that if you want to speak out, if you feel moved to speak out, you feel encouraged to do that. And if I haven't done that for you, then that's on me. And I have to do something about it. And excuse me, I keep forgetting where my camera is. For some reason, I think my camera is on my little picture on the screen, and it's not there. I know that. Asking thought-provoking questions is another way we create a safe environment. Allowing for silence. So often, storytellers, teachers, group leaders, workshop leaders are scared to death of silence. And we sometimes forget the power of silence in giving people space and time to decide to speak out and decide what they want to say. I would say to you, don't be afraid of the silence. We just had it a couple of minutes ago where I asked for a comment on that little story, and nobody spoke out. Okay, fine. And I hope I didn't rush to the next place too fast. I hope I left enough time for it to sit. Try to resolve, if there is conflict, particularly if you can get in at the beginning, using logic to resolve conflict. And I would say, to me, of all the things on this list of 8 things, I probably should have put that 8th. Because when there's emotional, especially as the more emotional the conflict gets, I think the harder it gets to respond with logic. Sometimes the only choice we have, and you hope some of the logic sticks. But it's also when things get emotional, logic often one of the first things gets thrown out in the trash. We have to acknowledge different perspectives. Often in these stories and in life, there's no exactly one right way, one right perspective. And every perspective deserves its space and its time. And sometimes from perspectives that are coming out of left field that may not go anywhere, there's still wisdom. There's still some wisdom in that person and that perspective, and we have to give it space and voice. Disagreement by itself there's nothing terrible about disagreement. It's useful. It does a lot of things. It gets a lot of different ideas out into the air. It gives chance for hot emotions to get cooled down a little as people express their emotions. If we allow disagreement and even encourage it, we're going to help people to discharge negative emotional content. It's a way of being respectful. Because you and I disagree about this should not mean that we can't sit down and eat a feast meal together, that we can't hold hands and pray together, that we can't have a laugh together about something else. It's okay. And then finally, on create a safe environment, we have to limit distractions. I just saw something, well, on my place to go for all good information, the internet. about that. One of the reasons we have so much inattention in this world, and people have so many alleged attention problems, is that there's too much distraction. And we live in a world full of distraction. Last night, I checked in on the news, CNN news, before I turned off the TV, got ready for bed. And CNN News is a primer on distraction. It's never just the screen and the speaker. There's messages over here, there's messages over here, there's a constant crawl under here with a constantly changing message. There are blurbs going here, they pop up things here. How do you pay attention? I'm a reasonably attentive person some of the time. I can't really sometimes. It's hard paying attention to what this talking head is talking about with all the stuff coming to me on the screen. Sometimes I just need space and time. Sometimes this idea, when we watch discussions on television and they degenerate into screaming heads at one another. I can't follow that. I don't want to. I'd do better when it's one person speaking at a time. And I think, I don't know if you've ever walked into a crowd of adolescents. I guess you have adolescents in India and you have adolescents in Brazil. I'm sorry if you do. That's one of the things we have to live with in this life. Walk into a crowd of adolescents and see how they do. It's all distraction. They're holding their phones. They're talking to one another, side conversations, following this and that and the other thing. No wonder when they get to school and school says, sit here, listen to the teacher, they have so much pride. They can't do that. We have to learn we're probably not born knowing how to do that. When I had to learn attention by listening to my grandma's stories when she was trying to teach me a lesson after I had done something stupid, like disappear for 4 hours when I was 4 years old. I had to learn by listening just to her. Just her and I, and my ears were just listening. I didn't like it sometimes, but I listened. I think I learned something in that. Any thoughts or questions on that? I'm encouraging everyone to speak. Let's give you some space to think about it. I notice wow. Louise Glegg has responded to everybody on chat, responding to Rachel's comments that are worth listening to. This is sort of disagreeing respectfully with love. So thank you, Louise. That's a great demonstration of listening safely and respectfully.
Could I also say that what I told you about was how I felt when I was younger. It's not necessarily how I feel now, but
I didn't hear the last of what you said, Rachel.
What I said was how I felt when I was younger at one point in time. It's not necessarily how I feel now.
Okay. Yeah.
I would add one other thing to your list there. expectations.
Uh-huh.
A lot of times, what we receive is what we expect. We have to monitor and control our own expectations of others.
Yeah, and of ourselves. Sometimes the worst expectations I have are what I expect of myself.
Years
Okay.
ago, I did a high school out in Kansas. And when I got there, the principal told me the teacher was absent that day. So he was going to introduce me, and then he had to go back to the office to do some things. And as he started to leave, he looked, oh, and incidentally, I'll be locking you in. That was a big, like, super red flag. And I'm saying, excuse me? And he goes, oh, well, this is our disturbed room. We have to lock the door. And I'm looking around this room, and this is high school. There are guys in this room who are bigger than I am. So I figure I have only one chance to live. I have to give them my expectation. So I introduced myself. I told them I'm going to tell you some stories. I'm going to teach you some history. There'll be plenty of time to answer questions. When I talk, I expect you to listen. When you talk, you can expect me to listen. Started with my best story, and that went on from there. It was great. Principal came in. I used to end all my story sessions because I grew up with CBS. People always call it inconvenient times.
Yeah.
I used to end all my story presentations. So I grew up with CBS afternoon specials. If you like the stories I'm telling you, go to the library. You'll find these stories or stories like them there. And I had ended the program that way. This guy came sauntering up, leather jacket, chains hanging off the shoulders. You knew this was the guy who controlled the school. This was the tough. This is the guy you didn't cross. And he
Yeah.
walked up to me and he said, you telling the truth? And it's like, well, about what? There are differences in opinions on stuff. About stories like what you told us in the library. And I told him it was, because, well, I've never been in there, but I'm going to go. The principal looks at me and tells me no one has ever lasted an entire hour in that classroom. And he wanted to know what I had done. I said, I gave them what I expected. They gave me back what I told them I expected, and I gave them what they expected of me. And he looks at me and goes, do you think I can do that? And I said, no, I don't think so. If you could do it, you would have done it years ago. Expectations make a huge difference. What we expect from the people around us is what they're going to give back to us.
That's true. Okay, we are at the end. So let me just jump to the last thing and I'll get out of here. And I want to thank you very, very much. If you guys get a copy of the PowerPoint, I have two Indian stories that we didn't get to. And I'm looking at it now, I'm realizing that was probably a workshop in itself. Let me leave you with three questions, and I'm going to stop. One, can you envision this workshop adding any value to your life and your work? And these are not in any particular order. Two, have there been times in your life when you had to decide who goes into the fire and who gets to stay in life? Well, you've had to make that decision. In the Army, when I was in the U.S. Army decades ago, we used to have a slogan, what are you going to do when they tell you to kill the cuckoo? And for 2 years, I didn't understand what that meant. And then I realized cuckoos were sacred and good luck in Vietnam. And sooner or later, power is going to ask you to kill the cuckoo. And what will you do when that happens? Kind of kept that as one of the mantras of my life. And three, are there ways you can see using these stories and materials in your family, your civic, your spiritual, or other communities? I hope there are. I thank you so much for being so patient at the end of a really, really long session. And again, if you get, Eric's putting it up, if you're going to get a copy of these slides, there's a slide on creating your own dilemma tales, which are fun to do and relatively easy to do. Anybody want the last word? Anybody want a last word? Eric hadn't cut us off yet. Okay, again, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the festival. Godspeed to Laura. And I hope you do get a chance to hear her when she comes back. She's a sweet and wonderful person. Thank you, Eric. You do this incredible. I don't know how you do it.
I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, maybe that helps. Sometimes that's the
He's
way to
like
do it.
Nasruddin. Les, he's like Nasruddin. He doesn't know what he's doing, but he kind of does, or stories does for him, so that's okay. Thank you so much, Les. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Eric.
Les.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Fabio.
Obrigado. See you later.
Obrigado.
Based on the results, don't figure it out.
You got it. You got it.
Thank you, Les.
Where in Kansas are you, Jeff?
Oh, heaven forbid. I am nowhere in Kansas ever. I'm a Missourian.
Oh, we're in Missouri. My wife's from Missouri. Her family's there. I love Missouri.
I was born in Independence. I grew up in Kansas City, and currently living in Eldon near the Lake of the Ozarks.
Okay, yeah. Kathy was born in Hannibal, and her
Yeah, I know
family
Hannibal
was
well.
in Sedalia, and we
Yep.
still got family scattered around the state. Her brother, who looks just like you, a late brother, looked just like you, was in Kansas, Chester. So I love it out there. They think
Oh, the
I'm crazy
Midwest.
as hell, but I love it. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you,
Eric.
Les. Thank you, everybody.